Okay, it's 5 o'clock. Let's get started. We have a pretty full agenda of a lot of short things, so we're going to have to do pretty quick transitions. This is, of course, the JMAP session. If that is not your destination, then you might want to get on a different plane. Once again, the note well, which has to do with a number of different things, including intellectual property and personal information and all sorts of things. If you have not read this, you should read it. We do take it seriously. And there is an additional part about that, having largely to do with harassment and matters of that sort, that you should also observe, and we take that very seriously as well. Please sign in on MeetEcho using either the MeetEcho Lite. If you're in the room, probably the MeetEcho Lite client. We use that in order to maintain the what has heretofore been referred to as the blue sheets, the attendance, and that's important in order to gauge interest in the working group. So please do that. You also need to use that in order to join the queue for the microphone if you have comments on things. If you're on site here, please keep your audio and video turned off so that we don't have feedback. Remote participants, if you're speaking or presenting, turn your audio on and video if you'd like. And we strongly recommend the use of a headset so that we can hear you clearly. And here's some other information, largely on how these things work. I presume that you're somewhat familiar with that. Here is the agenda in, unfortunately, slightly small print. We've got like 8 5-minute sessions. So we're going to have to do quick transitions between those. And then we're going to do the usual any other business and milestone review at the end. So congratulations on the publication of RFC 9425. JMAP for quotas. I think that was Renee that was the lead editor on that. So that's terrific. So that's a definite accomplishment for the group. Okay, let's run back to the agenda, and we're going to start with sharing. And do you want? I'll share the slides from here, Neil. Okay.
Okay, so this went into last call quite a few weeks ago. That last call has expired, I believe. That's working group last call, that is. The main feedback was just it needed a bit more kind of examples and how you would put it into a spec for like mail or calendars, because this is kind of the template for how sharing works everywhere, but it needs like a specific example. So I'll look at adding that in, but I think other than that, that's ready to go to whatever the next stage is. I forget. If anyone else has other comments on that, please send them to the list ASAP. Otherwise, I presume that is, yeah, ready.
Okay, thank you. Ken is up next with Civ. Are there slides for that?
No, no slides for Civ. It was, I think, last call could be done already. I don't recall any feedback, so perhaps it can move on. But if there's any feedback that people have now, I'm willing to listen. Hearing none, perhaps we can move that along, Jim.
Okay, great. So the next item is calendars and contacts, and Neil is back for that. Let's see, we're going to do calendars first, I guess.
Sure, calendars, the simple one in that nothing's really changed since last time. We believe the spec is basically ready, but we are waiting to see if there are any revisions to JS calendar. I think there's a JS calendar bit coming, as that's the data format we're using. We don't want to standardize the JMAP bit until we know that the data format is kind of definitely final. But I think we worked through all the issues we had on the JMAP bit of that spec. So probably some more implementation experience would be good on that. If anyone's started implementing it, let me know. We've obviously got quite a complete implementation at Fastmail, but we'll want to update that to match the final version before we push that forward. So yeah, we think that's nearly ready, but waiting for JS calendar base is the summary on that one.
Okay, and we'll switch over to contacts.
This one's a bit more interesting, yeah. So apologies for only publishing an updated draft on this on Sunday, if you flip to the next one. But that is available online. The email went out to the list if you haven't had a look yet. There are a few changes, so I'm going to run through a quick summary of the changes and kind of what's next for that draft. We were mainly, again, waiting on the data format, which is why I hadn't updated it in a while, but JS Contact is this close to being done. Robert is just handling the last few bits of feedback from the IETF last call on that, so we expect JS Contact to be published pretty soon, and once that's done, JMAP for contacts is really straightforward because it's just that data format plus JMAP for the synchronization, and there's really not much more to it. So the changes we've got, contact groups are no longer separate type to, oh, sorry, you can go back one. To contacts. This is because this is what's happened in JS Contact as well as the data format. It's kind of a single type, so have a look at the data format for more on that, but we thought it made most sense to just treat it the same, so there was consistency between the data format and this synchronization protocol. So essentially it's a contact card with type equals, so a kind, I think, equals group, represents a group, and you can have a members property with a set of UIDs for the members of that group. The cards can belong to multiple address books in the new draft rather than having to be in just a single one. This was done just to mirror the way calendars and mailboxes work in the other JMAP drafts. Just like in both of those, there's a capability that lets the server say the maximum amount is 1. So if you only support 1 on the server, you can still do that and map it to JMAP, but it gives the protocol that flexibility for servers that want to support kind of being able to attribute it to multiple. And that can be useful, especially because address books is kind of just like the mailbox in mail, and that is the kind of unit of sharing. So if you wanted to share different sets of cards with different people, you'd want different address books, which you can set sharing permissions on to be able to do that. This is a very trivial thing, but the data type has been renamed from card to contact card to, again, match kind of the name in the data format. So with event calendars, we have the JS calendar format and the event type within that, and we call that calendar event. Here we have the JS contact format and the card type within that, calling it contact card. Just consistency and hopefully a little bit clearer. And final, or not quite finally, blob ID for media. This is just if you have an embedded avatar or photo or something, rather than getting back a big data URL, the JMAP will convert that to a JMAP blob. The JMAP server, that is, will convert it to a JMAP blob. And you get the blob ID back, and you can then fetch those in the standard way, just like with attachments and email, so that you can load the data more efficiently and quicker. And same if you're creating them. The final change was just defining what properties the server should support for filtering and sorting if you're doing querying on the server, just so that was well defined. So with those in place, I think, again, it's actually fairly complete. We're waiting for JS Contact to be finalized before we push anything further, but as I said, there's really not much to it because it is just the JMAP synchronization protocol combined with the JS Contact format. Having said that, if you have any feedback on it once you've read the draft, and I realize, you know, because I published it so late, you probably haven't, but over the next few months. If you have time to look at that, I would appreciate any feedback on the list, and we will address that before the next IETF. But if JS Contact is published by then, I would hope this will be going to last call, possibly even by the next meeting. Any questions?
Okay,
Cool, thank you.
thumbs up from the audience. All right, thank you. So Alexia is next on S-MIME.
So it's wonderful not to look at your own document for so long that like I had to completely relearn what I was doing. Next slide. So just there are kind of two parts. One is signing and encryption. So generating signed and or encrypted messages. So this is the email set extension for specifying various parameters and various tweaks to this. This hasn't changed. Next slide, please. S-MIME header protect is another parameter to the generation side. And then in version 3, I added decryption by using email get, and you get a special magic property S-MIME blob ID, which you basically say, if you find encrypted body part, please decrypt it if you can. And then you feed the message into email parse with this. So the other thing I was looking at is what are the useful things you can do with encrypted messages, for example. And one thing is you probably want to find all the messages that are encrypted, for example, in your mailbox, or not encrypted, because you don't necessarily want to make you can blindly just say, oh, just decrypt everything and just, 10 hours later, depending how many messages you have, see what happens. But, or you can just say, using email query, you can say, I want to find all messages which are encrypted and then do something with them. So that's the part that is missing, which I will add. The other thing possibly is during decryption, one thing that a lot of email clients are doing is they are verifying whether who the message is, who is the sender of the message is matching the from address and stuff like this, and whether it's addressed to you. So I was wondering whether there is a need to possibly extract email addresses of recipients, for example, from encrypted S-MIME blob and do a search for that. If you have opinions, let me know.
Would that be likely to be different from the two addresses? I mean, is there additional utility from looking at the encrypted two addresses as compared with the two addresses on the in the message header?
So one thing, you will know all of the recipients, so you can find out other recipients in the message. So I don't know how much utility, maybe. Also, you can find out if there is possible mismatch between from and from in the message in clear text versus what's in the blob, whether the from is one of the senders or one of the recipients who can read the blob.
Assuming it hasn't been rewritten for DMARC or something.
Yes. So I know it's kind of more speculative thing. It's not fully baked. That's why I'm mumbling a little bit.
That's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it
Philip?
So I'm Philip. Just had a couple of questions.
announce your name, please?
Philip Tao.
Thank you.
So I saw that for the signing in encryption, for signing, you had the sign opaque option.
Mhm.
You know, for both signing and encryption, there's potentially a few different options you might want to perform it with, right? So for like encryption, you know, you might want to select what algorithm to use and whether it's authenticated encryption or non-authenticated.
Yeah, possibly.
And also the header encryption, you know, I think it might be good to allow a way to specify like which of those headers to encrypt, because you know, you might want to encrypt just the subject, for example, because it's user-generated text, or the subject and recipients, but not, you know, necessarily some of the other
Okay.
headers.
So with this, I think the way we've done this, it's basically referencing the LAMPS document on header protection, which tells you, which recommends which one to encrypt. So are you saying, you know, you want to have more control over this, you know, which one you want to encrypt, I suppose?
Yeah, and I guess also the header encryption document, I think I read an earlier draft. I'm not sure what exactly the current draft says, but there's like the injected headers and wrapped headers, which I think it recommends the injected headers.
Yes.
At this point. So I guess I don't know if it's worth allowing that to be specified as well, injected versus wrapped. I mean, but I guess that's kind of a side concern. My main issue is the MUAs might want to encrypt only a subset of headers, and you know, maybe I'm a little underprepared that I haven't read the latest document of the LAMPS header protection, so I'm not sure what is specified there exactly. But it still seems like it might be nice to have some level of control there.
Okay, can you send a reminder to the mailing list?
Yeah.
I kind of, yeah. I'm conflicted in a sense of, on one hand, yes, I want to have full control of every single option, right? Because this will get parity with whatever existing MUAs are doing. On the other hand, trying to get defaults which are as sensible as possible, so you don't need to, well, either can omit the options or.
Sure, I think having a set of default options, you know, a sensible defaults is something that, regardless of how it's done, should be done. I guess
Okay.
the question is just how much more configurable beyond that set of sensible defaults it should be. But I
Okay.
think, yeah, we can move this discussion to
I
the
think
mailing list.
probably controlling set of header fields protected is slightly more interesting than controlling algorithm, because algorithm will be dictated by, you know, capabilities of recipients, you know, what's the common denominator as far as ciphers is and all of that. But yeah, can you send a message on the mailing list just as a reminder, and we'll think and discuss.
Absolutely.
This is Barry Leba. As we've been talking, I've been thinking about your first bullet and trying to come up in my head with a use case for needing to know all the encrypted messages. And I can't imagine one. I can't imagine that you're ever going to want to say decrypt everything or whatever. And finding all the encrypted messages in a mailbox can likely be very expensive. It would seem to me that you would only
No, it's just media type match. Well, and a parameter, I think.
Right. It depends what information you have cached at the time, and depends. So it's going to depend on your mail store, I guess.
Yeah, I think this operation is probably going to be quick as opposed to asking to decrypt everything, which will be slow.
Yeah. So what is the use case for needing to know all the encrypted messages? It would seem to me that you would decrypt messages as you encountered ones that you wanted to deal with, and wouldn't have any cause to decrypt them
You
all.
can show different symbol in the scan list saying that it's encrypted. I also,
Why does the user care about it at that level?
okay. We had a requirement that you want to flag all the messages which are not encrypted or not as MIME signed, for example, to the user, because they should be an exception in some environments.
Okay, I'll buy that.
Or you're looking for you know that you're looking for something that you know is sensitive and you can't remember who sent it to you.
That one sounds like a stretch, Jim.
No.
Yeah, I'll admit to that.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't need the query to be extended just to show in the listing which ones are encrypted. You get that from when you fetch the email itself. This would only be if I wanted like a mailbox or kind of a pseudo mailbox called encrypted, where I clicked that and I got the list of all the encrypted. Maybe it makes users feel cool that they have their encrypted box.
And that was Neil Jenkins, by the
Yeah.
way.
And I guess my point was simply, I don't object to putting that feature in. I just doubt that it would be used. So.
Okay.
Any other comments on this?
Let me ponder it a little bit longer. I don't think it's kind of, it's not hard to implement because you don't actually need to even look inside the payloads. You just need to verify it's encrypted as MIME, basically. That's the only thing it does. But it's slightly more complicated than just matching content type. Maybe.
Would this be a mandatory capability for somebody implementing or an optional one?
I would just keep it as a part of the base just because I don't want to have too many options. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's just in terms of the complexity of somebody implementing.
Yeah, I agree with what Neil said off mic. Options suck.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's going to be there, it ought to just be part of it. And yeah, ponder. That's
Yeah,
all I'm
I
saying,
think
ponder.
options kind of works if you have something that might be quite expensive to implement, but might be useful in some cases. And then you think, okay, do you want it as a base or not? So this is not that, I think.
Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, just on the use case of searching for all encrypted. I mean, I feel like you can. So one use case that just popped into my head is like your private key has been compromised and you want to download everything, all your encrypted messages and delete those from the server, right? So I don't know. I feel like if you think hard enough,
Okay.
there could be.
You want to send all your correspondence your new key or something, your new public key or something.
Right. Yeah. Something like that.
All right. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Well,
Yeah. So I said last time that probably next time is going to be ready for last call. I think I will update the document before next time, so it should be ready.
okay, we'll get back to that when we do the to-do list here. Okay, so we've got tasks next. And so that's Hans-Jörg and or Joris. I'm not sure who's presenting. Okay.
Hi. So it's my first time using Meet Echo from remote since a long time. Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Good. Okay. So, yeah, tasks. Yeah, maybe you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So actually, not much happened until now, since last time. So basically, still have the same to-dos that I had at last IETF. Sorry for that. I didn't get the time to publish a new version. Yeah, so I'm basically gonna do that, and we'll talk about it at the next IETF, I would say. Are there any questions to the current draft? Has been there for a long time. If not, I would suggest you go to the next, to my next slide deck.
Okay, and that would be the portability deck, right?
Yes.
Coming up.
Okay. Yeah, so JMAP for migration and data portability. I presented that at last IETF. Was the first initial draft. So the idea here is to have a minimal version of JMAP for special use cases, in this case, portability use case. Yeah, so and after last IETF, there were some points mentioned that I addressed more or less directly after the last IETF. So yeah, the spec basically lists a lot of JMAP methods that are and objects, and is basically a guide on how to leave out certain things. So we have a minimal version of JMAP in the end. And here I changed it to return constant values and errors. In the previous draft, I just omitted some properties. Yeah, that's one big change. The second change is that the description property is now recommended for certain errors, and core echo is now one required method. So another things I did is move big parts of the document into 3 separate documents. 2 of those were already in the appendix. The last one, JMAP REST mapping, was moved from the main document into a separate one. Yeah, take a look at it. If you have some questions, ask away. Maybe next slide. Yeah. So I would like to ask you if you want to adopt portability in the JMAP working group.
So do we have any comments from anyone here about, I mean, we'll issue the call for adoption on the list, of course, but do we have any comments from anyone here about its readiness?
I just had a question. Did those, oh, so Neil Jenkins is so bad at that.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at the transcript and seeing so Neil Jenkins of soap. Is it saying something about my personal hygiene? I don't know. Did these updated drafts come around to the list? If they did, I missed them. I'm sorry. Or I'll just wondering.
Yeah,
do you know?
Definitely I think so. Need to check. I definitely wrote a mail that I updated it. Not sure if I linked the document again, but yeah. So
they're not
it's
working
definitely
documents, so they didn't.
Yeah, you don't get an
Yes,
automatic
okay.
notification
Right,
for these.
that's why I missed them. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I guess the message is then be aware that these documents exist, and please weigh in when we issue the call for adoption.
Yes. And for now, I would also just have one call for adoption for the portability document. The other 3 documents are not as final yet. But feel free to read them and comment on them, of course.
Okay, thank you. We will then transition to, let me kind of change the slides here. We're going to have a riveting talk about snooze. Been waiting all day to use that line.
Okay, so just a little bit of feedback on this draft. So there's an existing draft over an extra working group on using Civ to snooze messages. And part of the feedback on that was that the facility for actually doing the snooze itself or where the message sits was underspecified, which looking back on it was actually good feedback. So in the process of doing that, I took the liberty to document what we at Fastmail are doing in terms of using the snoozing messages via JMAP. And this is a design that Neil came up with. So just bringing this here to see if there's any interest outside of Fastmail. So I think we all kind of know what snoozing emails are. Most providers are doing it in some way, shape, or form. This is an attempt to standardize that over JMAP.
Okay.
So real quick overview, what's in the spec. There's new capability, obviously. There's a new snoozed role, which is also shared with the snoozed attribute for IMAP, which designates the mailbox that the snooze messages are going to reside in. And that's pretty much that mailbox's sole purpose. And then there's a new snooze property that goes on mails or emails when doing email set. So here's what that new property looks like. It's pretty straightforward. There's 3 details, one of which is mandatory, which is the date at which time you're going to awaken the message. There's a mailbox ID of where you would like that to go once it's awakened. If you don't specify that, it goes to the user's inbox. And then there's a optional set keywords, which you tell the server which keywords you want to add and remove at the awaken time. Yep, Neil.
Neil Jenkins, just quick correction on that slide. That where it says immutable, that one should say mutable because you can change the snooze status, of course. For snooze right at the top.
Yep. That was a cut and paste there. Yep, thank you. So that's pretty much what the snooze detail looks like. Next slide, please. So very basic. If you want to snooze an email, you update the mailbox IDs to include the ID of the snooze mailbox, and you set the snooze details, telling the server when and how you want this to be awakened. And to unsnooze an email, obviously you take it out of that snooze mailbox and you clear the snooze details. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. So the question is there any interest in trying to standardize this in this working group? And if so, the question for the chair would be, because the current draft has both Civ, JMAP, and IMAP in it, which encompasses 2 working groups, how do we split this into 2 that travel together? Do we keep it all in one and coordinate between working groups? I'm sorry? The 2 working groups in question are pretty much the same one anyways. Just
Usually joined at the hip.
So I guess the first question is there interest in trying to standardize this? Got a thumbs up from
Seeing some nods in the room here.
Neil Jenkins again. Just the main thing is, to me, is just are there subtle differences in terms of how everyone's doing it, which would mean that it's unlikely to be adopted. And I don't know that really without feedback from some of the other implementers. Like, I think everyone's
keeping there from being subtle differences is part of the reason for having a spec.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. If there's interest,
How much? Hector, could you go and use the mic, please?
Hector from Centronics. I have interest in it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and obviously, Neil, if we find that the various providers have different parameters they need, we can certainly extend this. This would just be a starting point to start the discussions, obviously. So I guess we take it to the list. Correct, Jim? And
yeah, I guess the question in my mind is how much common material is there between, if you think if we think of a JMAP flavor of the spec and an extra flavor of the spec, how much common material is there between them? I'm wondering whether there should be 2 or 3 that refer to like a core snooze.
I put the 3 items in the one draft because there is enough common material, but I could look to see if there's a way to split them where the other 3 refer back to one. But that seems like it might be overkill too.
That might be. It's not that big anyway, I don't imagine. Neil?
Neil again. Ken, I can't remember. Did we add anything in of being able to snooze over IMAP? Because we didn't implement that, I didn't think, the first time. There is in the spec, though?
It's in this current draft. It's based on something that Rick had
cool.
presented in Philly, I believe. Okay, I guess we go to the list and then take it from there.
Yeah, we got Alexis in the queue, so let's hear from him.
Can you remind me who are the AGs for Extra and JMAP? They're not the same person, are they?
I don't recall if it's split between Murray.
Okay. Well, either way.
Well, until the end of the month, correct?
Maybe just ask AG if I think you can build a case that they should all be in one place and just make sure that they're happy with this.
Sure.
Like, okay, probably ask for adoption here and then, or in extra.
I'll bug Murray about it and see what he thinks.
Yeah, I don't know of any examples where
Just
we've
to
had
fill
a.
in the answer to that question, Murray has both of them. Extra and JMAP are both Murray.
Well, in this case, you probably won't care.
Right. Okay.
Hans-Jörg?
This is Hans-Jörg. Yeah, I'm seconding the fact that this should probably be all in one document, because also I think if you implement it in JMAP, you could, I guess in Fastmail, you can still access the mailbox by IMAP as well. So that needs to be in sync anyway.
Correct.
And also I think if there are third-party vendors, they will likely have at the moment a solution based on their own legacy API. So it would be also helpful for them maybe to know how this mapping between a non-IMAP API and an IMAP representation works. So
Right.
I think all of this makes it sense to be consistently in one document and not scattered.
Great. Thank you. Any other feedback, comments? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And then Hans-Jörg about archives. Give me a sec to share that. Whoops. There we go.
First one mic already. So yeah. Hello, everybody. This is work that spun out of a
Why don't you
discussion.
move the microphone up a
Sorry,
little bit so it gets better?
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah.
This is actually work that spun out of a coffee room discussion at Yokohama after discussing portability, and it's about basically persisting JMAP data when it's not stored on a server for various purposes. Next slide, please. And yeah, well, the goal is to think about a container format, as I already said, for handling JMAP data outside. It's a little bit inspired by the fact that we have a small JMAP CLI, which we work with, which we use for testing, mock data, and so on. And so we always want to import JMAP data, which we have as test data represented to a server, for instance. And there we already implemented something like this a little bit. And we thought it might be useful also for many other cases. And the predominant case, of course, for us is data portability and migration, meaning giving users a chance to export their mailbox and keep a copy by themselves. In some migration scenarios, when you do not directly have a connection to source and destination, which is a live connection, you could use that to persist temporarily the data on the disk. And you could, with that format, also trust that this will still work after some time without doing a proprietary thing. Another thing is backup. So that discussion in Yokohama was actually with Braun, and he mentions there is also some internal backup thing at Fastmail, I think, where user mailboxes are sometimes stored against a deletion of stuff. Maybe Braun, if he's listening, he can also comment on that later on. Another thing, which is a little related to the to both of the former things, is dataset exchange in general. So many of us might know about Enron, for instance, where you have this email dataset of this Enron case, which you can download for research purposes or for digital forensics. So I think that would also be use cases where you might want to export a mailbox in a certain data set in a standardized format. You might even use that in some development use cases. So you could have a simple client without a big database or so, which just uses that internally. We had some discussion at the hackathon that there might be interesting use cases for clients here as well, for having a bulk download for an initial sync from a server, something like that. Yeah, so there seem to be plenty of use cases for that. Next slide, please. And yeah, there's some related work, obviously. So there is pure mail storage. Many of you will be familiar with MailDeer or Mbox. I didn't actually find an RFC for MailDeer. I'm not sure if this is true, but never see. Dan Bernstein just invented it. Ah, yeah, okay.
We'll repeat that for the mic. Dan Bernstein just invented it. John Levine says. Thank you.
But of course, these are common formats in a way if you just deal with mail. If you look at, if you take a little bit of broader scope and look at, things that go beyond mail, I think the most commonly used format also, for instance, when you look for this Enron archive is usually PST files, which of course is a proprietary format by Microsoft, which Outlook use, and many Exchange servers can import it. There is many tooling for other groupware systems which imports or exports that. I think also other tools beyond Outlook partially try to implement it, but it's very difficult because the format, I think, is not fully specified. Maybe I'm even wrong. But nevertheless, there are not so many implementations and libraries available. On a similar matter, there is NSF databases in Domino Nodes, which is sort of similar. There's also things like Google Takeout. Not sure you're aware of that. So with Google, you can request a dump of your Google account, and you basically get a big tar file, which includes folders, which your mails, which I think is basically either Maildio or Mbox. And then even your Google Maps, you have a whatever GPX file in that folder and so on. I think they use iCalendar and vCard for the contacts and calendars. Yeah, so this is basically what's around, and obviously, as you see, this is not really satisfactory for most cases, and so there's also not really much tool support around this. So for instance, for the Google Takeout, it's not really easy to digest for end users. I'm not aware of any tooling which really helps an end user to deal with that file. I mean, of course, you can unzip it and then individually use each file with an appropriate program, but it's, I think, not really usable. And I'm also not aware of any provider where you can just import that file again and it will magically work. Okay, next slide, please. So how could this look like? So this is a little bit work in progress. As I said, we have some internal implementation where we didn't really think a lot about, just because we did this just use for test data. But discussions I had thought like this might be useful to probably generalize a little bit, listen to other requirements of people, and maybe coming up with a first suggestion. So one such suggestion could be, yeah, you have a file which might be compressed or not, and basically which might separate folders by data types, by JMAP data types. So you might have a mail folder, a contacts folder, a calendars folder, a CIF folder. You might think about separating blobs for some reason, because the file might not grow too large and so on. You might think about, for instance, in the mail folder, even to reuse Maildio or Mbox, question mark, to probably stay with the standards there. And yeah, for other data types, maybe just using the corresponding JMAP responses as JSON files. And of course, you would need some mechanism on top. This is here's the index JSON, for instance, which tells you a little bit, okay, how to navigate within that file, have some meta information, and so on. Yeah, obviously, there is a lot of questions that would arise from that further on. So that's basically what the state here is. So I'm happy to learn a little bit what's the feedback on that, if it's worth, working on this further, providing a real draft for review, and so on. Yeah.
And Neil, go for it.
Neil Jenkins, remember this time. I quite like the look of this as a just standardized takeout format. I think that's a useful thing to have. Mm-hmm. I would say it's only tangentially related to JMAP in that respect. Like, I'm not sure that should be part of the name, but certainly using JS contact, JS calendar, and then obviously just a raw RFC 5322 email file. I think individual files for each one with the folder structure seems fine. You need metadata to preserve keywords in particular. I think if you wanted to do actual full fidelity, so you could export and import and have everything back as it was, that could either be in one single index file at the top like you have, or kind of individual sidecar files. Each email file also has a little metadata file with other stuff in it. Probably better to have a single one at the top, but either would work. But in general, I quite like the look of that as a format. You could, yeah, you could use. We could probably use that.
Okay, Daryl is next.
Daryl Miller, Microsoft. The PSD format is supposed to be part of our open specification promise. Okay. I pasted a link in the chat. If it was updated as of last year, if you find issues with it, reach out to me. I'm in the Exchange division. I can find who to hunt down.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And see, Braun, I think, is next on the queue.
Hello, is my sound all right?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, so the Fastmail backup format is not quite the same as this. It's much more specific to the internals of Cyrus. It does a lot of stuff by the SHA-1 of individual mail messages, so it has deduplication in there. It's a tar file with a bunch of symlinks and all sorts of smarts, and the raw index files in the binary internal representation. So it's certainly not the same as this, but this looks great. Probably one thing to consider is diffs. If you wanted to take one of these archives and then have something that you applied on top of it to update to a new state, particularly if you're looking at backups, you want incremental. So I think it's probably worth looking at how you might do incremental in terms of a reference to another file, maybe put a UUID in each of these. And so you could apply this patch to this UUID and have the index blank out files or something. And either that'll have an empty file with the same location as the file that you're removing, and that would allow you to have an eventual, that's something that I ran into as an issue with my tar file format, was if I was trying to remove a file, how did I do that? And so I've done it with a blank file, and so you just have to remove all files with 0 size, but if you unpack them one over the next. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're next.
Hey, my name's Ben Gehring. Basically, my question is like, what are the trade-offs as you see it between representing this as like an archive of a file system subtree versus like a multi-part media type that contains a bunch of different MIME types that are like mail messages or tasks or something? Mm-hmm. So like representing this composition of many things as a file system subtree archived versus just a multi-part message.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Maybe stay there a little bit if I really understood correctly, because if you say like representing this as a multi-part object would mean I put everything in a giant a MIME tree, right? Whoa. Yeah. I'm thinking if this is an appropriate format for that and can be efficiently navigated. I mean, that could certainly be an option. I wonder if, for instance, the diff property, which Bron mentioned, would be so easy to realize here. Because you might want, also for our use case where we have the test data, for instance, we want to easily access individual entities, so individual contacts, calendars, and so on, which is probably also like from a user perspective, something, you want to remove or move a certain contact or update a certain contact. And I wonder if in the MIME case it would require always parsing the whole tree. If this would be the most efficient way, I'm not sure. But maybe something I need to think more about it.
Yeah, just an idea.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
I'm sorry, you said your name was Ben?
Yeah, Ben.
Okay, you aren't signed in on Meet Echo, it doesn't seem, so please do that.
Sure.
And it's a reminder to everybody, if you're not signed in on Meet Echo, we need it for attendance. Neil, you're next.
Yeah, Neil Jenkins. Just regarding that previous point, I think the reason not to have one massive kind of MIME file is availability of existing tooling, basically. I think, there's a lot of existing tooling if you've got a standard compression archive format like zip or something to then decompress that, grab out the bits you need easily and pass them, rather than having to pass one single massive file in order to, which means in order to get the small bit of data you need, is you're going to have harder time finding good tooling for that and a harder time doing it efficiently. Sure, but you've still got to pass it in the first time to divide it all up and stuff. So yeah, I would say this kind of format is probably better, personally.
Maybe while Neil was speaking, I was also thinking to the MIME thing. I think one of the things is, you might not even need to have a single archive format here, but you could also decompress this for some reason, and then you could easier do a rsync or something like that with the individual files, which is probably not easy also with MIME types.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the same point, that I think the archive format's a lot better because you can unpack multiple of them. I'm almost leaning towards the idea of having the index.json basically contain a reference to a UUID.json that actually describes, so it just has a list of UUIDs in it, and then that file.json for each one, so it's indirection. And then if you have a diff file that refers back to a previous archive as well, you would then have the index file list all the UUID.json files that were required for this plus the previous versions of it, which, you know, it might be, so if you had an original file plus 100 diffs over 100 days, you might wind up with a long but still not that huge index.json. And then you could just unpack each of these archive files in turn over the directory. And in theory, you then have a fully parsable archive. And the files that aren't referenced by any of the indexes can be removed safely. And that would give you a backup format that you could incrementally apply using basically standard tools and still extract the data, which is what the goal that I was going for with the backup format that we use. You can just untar the file, and it's actually multiple tars concatenated together, and then that whole stream gzipped. You can ungzip that into a directory, read the indexes that come out of it, and that's enough to reconstruct all the message using, obviously you need to understand some of the formats, but you can use standard tools to get all the data out. There's nothing really custom about it.
John Levine at the mic.
Yeah, John Levine. I think this is a good idea. I think this discussion is telling us that it's a little bit underbaked, you know. And for example, like your example of like here's all the components we want to have. I think if we go through, figure out what the components are, figure out to what extent we want to be able to randomly access them, then I think we can, then you can come back and say, well, here is a whole bunch of well-known standard formats, and pick, you know, like compressed tar is a perfectly fine format, but the only way you can access it is to stream through it, you know, and which is fine, or maybe it's zip, in which case you can seek to a particular file. But but I think once you figure out how you want to access this, then picking the container should be easy.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like there was a lot of interest in this, and you've got some ideas now. So we'll see a draft sometime.
Hope so. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. All right. We're at the any other business section of the meeting. Is there hopefully a very quick any other business? Don't see any movement here, so we should go on with a milestone update. And Braun has this particular talent for editing milestones on the fly, and I don't know how he does that. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and take notes and do it afterwards. So we had 3 milestones. Whoa, we've got some old milestones here. Let's see. I'll start with the oldest ones. It was, submit Civ to IESG was supposedly December of last year. So do we have an update for that, Ken?
Should be ready. I think it came out last call.
Oh, yeah. I lost track of that. So yeah, we'll be submitting that to IESG in a month or so, maybe. Let's see, JMAP sharing was December. I forget who's the sharing. Is that Neil?
Yeah, that's just finished working group last call, we think.
Oh, okay.
So I'll add a few examples, and I think it's ready to go off.
Okay. Well, I'll push both of those out to next month or something coming up, just so it isn't so far back. We had adopt a draft for a basic migration simplified endpoint. I don't know what the story is behind that milestone. Should we drop that?
That's actually, where's my video? Ah, here's my video. I think that's actually the possibility draft. It's maybe a bit weird naming.
That's the which draft, I'm sorry?
The portability draft. So the idea was a simplified version of JMAP. So I think that's why we called it like that.
Okay. So rename that, and I think we can probably put the adoption for next month.
Sounds good.
SMIME sender extensions to IESG. was March. Before, okay. I'll put November or something like that. I think that's, boy, I'm getting spell corrected from S-MIME to smile. Let's see. Document with guidance for implementations of IMAP servers and proxies. Is that even ours? Does Alexi know about that?
That was my fault as an area director, right? You know, that was a requirement for chartering this working group.
I think it would be reasonable just to delete that, right? It doesn't look like we're going to do it. I don't know. But should we hang on to it just to remind ourselves it would be nice to have?
Let's double check that our charter doesn't, what charter says. Because we might need to.
All right, let's leave it for now. Kick it forwards.
Okay.
As no longer area director, I wouldn't object to deleting it if we're a charter. So.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Let's push it through to December and we can talk about it in Prague.
John, did you have a comment, or are you?
I tried and failed to take myself out of the queue.
Done. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to be recognize you if you needed that. Let's see. JMAP calendars to IESG. That's kind of on hold due to CalX, right? Do we have an idea of what should we push it out one IETF or two, or?
Neil?
I'm not quite sure. I'd have to check with Robert what the status of that is. Maybe two to be on the safe side. I mean, sure. All right. Yeah.
Okay, and then also tasks. Is that also held up, or is that?
Sorry.
Are we masters
Same
of
for
our own,
tasks.
data?
Yeah, the idea was to publish them together.
Ah, okay.
I guess.
Any new milestones that we should add here on any of this new work? Let's see. We've got the adopting a draft for migration, so that one's covered.
I don't think contacts was mentioned. JMAP contacts. Hopefully
Right.
that could be done by next IETF if the JS contacts spec gets through, which I expect it to. It's almost done.
Okay, and what is the milestone of?
Last call, or I don't know, something like that. I'm not sure what milestones we normally do.
I'll say November for working group last call. Okay. Any other pieces, Ken?
Yeah, this is Ken. Do we need a milestone for call for adoption for snooze?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Actually, we'll put the milestone for adoption. And it's basically, sounds like it's ready for that. Do you need to do another spin before we do the call for adoption? Okay, so we'll put that down for a month or two out, something like that. Okay. Any other milestones we need? All right. And I think we're done and just in time. So thanks to everybody, and appreciate all of the good work and the keeping us on track for this meeting. Had a lot to cover. So thanks very much, and we'll see you at the next IETF.
Great work, everyone, and thanks, Jim.
You bet.
See you next time.
I added those notes down. For the notes, I just put some comments.
Yeah, I wasn't taking much in the way of notes. I was mostly trying to recall and speak. Oh yeah, I've got the notes on the milestones. I had a question about one other thing. And what was that? Stay.